You are listening to Silent Waves Radio. What follows is an entirely fictional emergency broadcast, created for storytelling and entertainment purposes only. No real individuals have been depicted, and no actual events are described. This is fiction. Good evening. I'm Alex Mercer, and this is Silent Waves Radio. We are interrupting our regularly scheduled programming to bring you what we can only describe, at this moment, as a developing and deeply serious situation unfolding across multiple regions of the United States. We want to be careful here, very careful, because the information coming into our newsroom is fragmentary. It is contradictory in places, and we are doing everything we can to verify what we're telling you before we say it. What we can confirm at this hour is this. Armed conflict has broken out between federally aligned National Guard units and state-controlled militia forces in at least 3 states along the southern interior. The first reports began arriving approximately 40 minutes ago. We are going to stay on this for as long as it takes.
Alex, I want to add something to that before we go further because I think the listeners deserve to hear it plainly. What we are describing tonight is not a protest. It is not a riot. The language being used by our correspondents in the field, and I want to stress these are trained journalists who do not use this word lightly. The language they are using is warfare. Organized, armed, coordinated conflict between American citizens and American governmental forces on American soil. I've been in this chair for 11 years. I have never said anything like that on air. And I want you, whoever you are listening right now, in your car, in your kitchen, in your living room, I want you to understand that we are not being sensational. We are being honest. Take a breath. Stay with us.
To give our listeners a geographic framework, the initial flashpoint appears to be the border region between Tennessee and Kentucky, specifically in and around the city of Clarksville, Tennessee, where a convoy of federal military vehicles was reportedly interdicted. That is the word our field team used, interdicted, by armed militia units aligned with a coalition of state governments that have, over the past 72 hours, issued what they're calling declarations of sovereign reassertion. We covered those declarations earlier this week on this program. At the time, most analysts, ourselves included, treated them as political theater. We were wrong to dismiss them so quickly. The declarations were signed by the governors of Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and, this came in just moments ago, Georgia. 4 states. And the conflict is no longer theoretical.
I'm looking at a message that just came through our listener line. I'm going to read it because I think it represents what a lot of people are feeling right now. It's from a woman who says she's in Nashville, and she says, I could hear what sounded like artillery about 30 minutes ago to the north. My children are asking me what that sound is. I don't know what to tell them. Please tell me what's happening. And I want to say to her, and to everyone else in the Nashville metro area, we are going to get you information as fast as we can verify it. Right now, our guidance, in the absence of official evacuation orders, is to stay indoors, stay away from windows, and keep your radio on. Do not try to drive north out of Nashville toward Clarksville. We are hearing from multiple sources that roadways in that corridor are either blocked by militia checkpoints or experiencing extremely heavy and dangerous traffic.
We're about 1 hour into this broadcast now, and I want to bring in what the federal government has actually said, because there has been a statement. It was released by the Office of the Secretary of Defense approximately 25 minutes ago. I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, the United States government is aware of armed incursions by non-federally sanctioned military units against lawful federal convoys operating within the borders of Tennessee. These actions constitute an illegal act of aggression against the government and people of the United States. The President has authorized the activation of Title 10 federal military authority and has ordered elements of the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell to assume defensive postures. All Americans are urged to remain calm and comply with directives from legitimate federal authorities." End quote. That is the statement. It is brief, it is measured, and notably, it does not use the word war. The administration is not using that word tonight.
But the people on the ground are. We have a correspondent. I'm going to call her by her field name only for safety reasons right now. She's asked us to do that. She goes by Reporter Delta. She is outside of Clarksville, and she called in about 15 minutes ago. I'm going to read from my notes of that conversation. She said, quote, "It is loud here. The convoy, 3 vehicles, 2 armored, was stopped on Route 79, approximately 4 miles south of the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. There was an exchange of fire. I cannot give you a duration, but it was not brief. There are people on the road. There is smoke. I can see what I believe are casualties on both sides. Local emergency services have been called, but I have not seen them arrive. People in nearby houses are standing in their yards. Some of them are recording on their phones. Some of them are crying. I am keeping my head down." That was Reporter Delta. She is safe. We are in contact with her.
Casualty figures at this stage are genuinely unknown. We are not going to speculate with human lives. What we can say is that the engagement on Route 79 involved, according to our correspondent, somewhere between 40 and 60 armed individuals on the militia side, and a federal convoy that our sources say numbered approximately 12 personnel. The outcome of that specific engagement is still being assessed. We are also now receiving reports, and again, we are being careful here, of a second engagement, this one in northern Mississippi, near the city of Corinth. This would place 2 simultaneous armed engagements on what appears to be a rough geographic line running northeast to southwest through the American South. That is either a coincidence or it is a coordinated strategy. Given the declarations of sovereign reassertion we mentioned earlier, coordination seems significantly more likely.
I want to talk about what's happening to ordinary people right now because that is going to matter enormously in the hours and days ahead. We're already hearing from listeners across Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia about things that feel at first mundane but are actually deeply significant. Grocery stores in Memphis are reporting lines. Not panic buying lines yet, but people are going in. People are filling carts. In Atlanta, we're hearing that several gas stations in the northern suburbs have run dry. Not because of any supply disruption, but because people are filling up. Flight search traffic, according to a source in the travel industry who contacted us, spiked by roughly 400% in the last 45 minutes for departures out of Nashville International and Memphis International. People are trying to leave, and that impulse is understandable, but it creates its own cascade of consequences that we need to start thinking about right now.
We're receiving a statement now from the governor of Tennessee. This is Governor, I'm going to refer to him by his title only, as per our editorial decision tonight to minimize individual personalization of political figures. The governor of Tennessee has released a statement through his official communications office. I will read it. The sovereign people of Tennessee have, through their elected representatives, reasserted their constitutional authority over the lands and commerce of this state. Federal military operations within Tennessee territory, without the consent of the state government, constitute an act of aggression, and we will defend our people accordingly. I call upon all Tennessee National Guard personnel to report to State Command, not Federal Command, effective immediately. I call upon all citizens to remain calm, support your neighbors, and trust that your state government is acting in your interest and in the interest of liberty." End quote. This statement is significant for several reasons. The order to National Guard personnel to switch allegiance from federal to state command is legally extraordinary. It essentially splits the Guard. And historically, and I say this with the weight that history deserves, It is the kind of order that transforms a political crisis into a military one.
And I want to follow that thread, Alex, because what it means for a soldier, for a young man or woman in a National Guard uniform who joined to help their community after floods and tornadoes, what it means for that person tonight is almost impossible to comprehend. You have the federal government telling you one thing. You have your state governor telling you another. You have your family calling you. You have your conscience. We have received in the last 10 minutes alone 7 messages from people who identify themselves as current or former National Guard members. I won't read them all, but one of them says, "I've been a guardsman for 6 years. Tonight my captain got a call from the state adjutant general telling us to stand down from federal orders. My captain told us to stay in barracks until further notice. Nobody's sleeping." That is the texture of what is happening tonight in real terms, for real people in real barracks.
It has now been approximately 2 hours since the first reports reached our newsroom. We want to update you on the geographic scope of what we're tracking. The 2 engagements we've confirmed, Route 79 in Tennessee and the Corinth area in Mississippi, remain the only confirmed armed exchanges. However, there are now reports, unconfirmed, from northern Alabama near the city of Huntsville that suggest federal military aircraft, likely from Redstone Arsenal, are conducting surveillance flights over the area. Redstone Arsenal is, for listeners who may not know, one of the most significant military research and logistics installations in the country, and it sits squarely within the territory of a state that has signed a Declaration of Sovereign Reassertion. The question of what happens to federal military installations within secessionist-aligned states is one that no one has had to answer in this country in more than 160 years. We are going to have to answer it now.
We're going to take a moment to acknowledge something because I think it needs to be said. People across America who are not in the South tonight, who are in Ohio, in Oregon, in New York, in Minnesota, are watching their phones, watching screens, and they may feel a complicated mixture of things. Distance, confusion, maybe a sense that this doesn't affect them. And I want to gently push back on that, not with alarm, but with honesty. The United States economy, the power grid, the interstate highway system, the federal tax structure, these are not regional things. They are national things. What happens in Tennessee tonight will arrive at every doorstep in this country, just perhaps more slowly in some places than others. We are one country, or we have been. What we are right now at this hour is less certain.
We have just received a significant piece of information. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued a temporary flight restriction, a TFR, over a large area of Tennessee, northern Mississippi, and northern Alabama. This effectively grounds civilian aircraft in that corridor. Nashville International Airport and Memphis International Airport have both suspended departure operations. Arrivals are still being permitted on a case-by-case basis for medical and emergency flights only. This is consequential. Thousands of passengers are now stranded at those airports. And the people who were trying to book flights out, Sierra mentioned this earlier, they no longer have that option. The exits are narrowing. We want to be very clear. Road travel in the immediate conflict zones is extremely dangerous. Road travel out of the general region via interstate, while more viable, may become complicated if more checkpoints are established. We are not telling anyone to leave or stay. We are telling you that your options are changing in real time, and you should monitor this broadcast and official emergency channels.
We have a caller, a listener who got through on our emergency phone line. I'm going to call her Margaret. That's the name she gave us. Margaret says she's in a suburb of Birmingham, Alabama. Margaret, if you're still listening, I want you to know we heard you. And here is what you told us. She said her husband is a Shelby County Sheriff's deputy, and that he was called into a mandatory briefing 2 hours ago and has not been allowed to use his personal phone since. She says the last thing he told her was, quote, "I don't know what I'm going to be asked to do, and I need you to take the kids to your mother's." Her mother lives in Kentucky. She's trying to decide whether to leave tonight, in the dark, with her 2 children, ages 4 and 7. She asked us, is it safer to go or stay? And we cannot answer that for her. We cannot. But we can say, if you have a safe destination, if you have fuel, if you have someone who knows you're coming, those are the conditions under which evacuation makes sense. Follow your instincts. Trust your knowledge of your own situation.
It has now been approximately 4 hours since the initial reports, and the picture is becoming, if not clearer, then at least more defined. Let me give you a structured account of what we believe we know at this hour. First, confirmed armed engagements, 2, as previously reported, in Tennessee and Mississippi, with a possible third, still unconfirmed, being reported near the Georgia-South Carolina border outside the city of Augusta. Second, government positioning. 4 states have issued declarations of sovereign reassertion: Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. The federal government has responded with the Fort Campbell defensive mobilization and the FAA flight restrictions. Congress is reportedly in an emergency session, though we have received no statement from the legislative branch as of yet. Third, civilian impact. Road networks in and around the conflict zones are experiencing significant congestion. Communication disruptions are being reported in several counties in northern Tennessee. Cell service is intermittent, and at least one internet service provider is reporting outages in the Clarksville area, likely due to infrastructure being in or near the conflict zone. Fourth, and perhaps most sobering, casualty numbers. We have not been given official figures. We believe there are fatalities. We will report confirmed numbers the moment we have them.
The communication disruptions Alex mentioned deserve more attention because they're going to be one of the defining features of this crisis for the people living inside it. When your phone stops working, when the internet goes out, when the power flickers, those are the moments when fear stops being abstract and becomes very, very personal. We have heard from listeners in Clarksville itself before communication became intermittent, describing what that feels like. One message sent about 90 minutes ago reads, "The streetlights just went out on my block. My neighbor came over because she's alone and scared. We're listening to you on a battery radio. Please don't stop broadcasting." And we won't. Silent Waves Radio will remain on air. We have backup power systems, and we are going to stay with you.
We're now receiving our first semi-official casualty estimate, and I want to contextualize it properly before reading it. This comes from a Tennessee Emergency Management Agency spokesperson who spoke briefly to one of our affiliate stations in Nashville. The spokesperson said, and I quote carefully here, "We are aware of multiple fatalities associated with the incident on Route 79 and are coordinating with local authorities and federal liaisons to establish an accurate count. We are not in a position to release numbers at this time." The use of the phrase multiple fatalities is significant. It is bureaucratic language for more than one, but it tells us nothing precise. What it does tell us is that this is confirmed. People have died tonight in Tennessee. That is now official. The first deaths of what may be a very long and very terrible chapter.
6 hours in now. Let's talk about what's happening to the country beyond the immediate conflict zones, because the ripple effects are already visible and they're moving fast. We've been monitoring social media through our digital team. I know many of you are doing the same. And the picture it's painting is one of a country that is shocked, but also, in a troubling way, not entirely surprised. Years of political tension, years of rhetoric about sovereignty and tyranny and liberty and overreach from all directions. And now those words have, for some, been given guns. We're seeing reports of demonstrations forming in several cities, pro-secession rallies in parts of Texas, Louisiana, South Carolina, counter demonstrations in Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. No violence reported at those yet, but the night is young, and emotion is high. Police departments in major cities have activated additional shifts. The social geography of the country is moving.
I want to address the international dimension because other nations are watching this and their responses matter. The British Foreign Office has issued a travel advisory urging British nationals in the affected states to register with the nearest consulate and monitor official guidance. Canada's Prime Minister, again a fictional representative, has released a statement expressing deep concern and calling for immediate dialogue and de-escalation. The European Union's foreign policy chief has called for an emergency session of the EU Council to discuss the situation. Mexico, which shares a long border with Texas, a state that has so far not signed a declaration, is reportedly in consultations with federal U.S. officials about border security protocols. The world is watching. This is not an internal American matter that can be hermetically sealed. It is, within hours of its beginning, a global event.
We've received a message from a listener who says he's a history teacher in Ohio, and he's been reading to his students tonight. They were doing a sleepover at school, a field trip thing, and now they're all awake watching this unfold. He says his students, who are 15 and 16 years old, keep asking him, "How did this happen? How did we get here?" And he says he doesn't know what to tell them that's honest but not terrifying. And I've been thinking about that question for the last hour. How does a country get here? It doesn't happen in a night. It happens in thousands of nights before this one. It happens in arguments at dinner tables and comment sections, in legislative chambers and courtrooms, in the slow erosion of the belief that the people on the other side of the political divide are still fundamentally your neighbors. I don't have an answer that will comfort those 15-year-olds. I just have the truth, which is, this was a long time coming, and the responsibility for understanding how belongs to all of us.
14 hours since the first reports. Dawn is approaching across the Eastern time zone, and with it, a new and more visible phase of this crisis. Overnight, we can now report, the situation escalated significantly in 3 key areas. In Clarksville, Tennessee, elements of the 101st Airborne Division clashed with Tennessee state militia forces in what sources are describing as a sustained firefight lasting approximately 2 hours. We are told federal forces have established a perimeter around Fort Campbell, which straddles the Tennessee-Kentucky border. The Kentucky governor has issued a state of emergency and is mobilizing the Kentucky National Guard, on the federal side, it appears, which puts Kentucky in direct confrontation with its neighbor to the south. In Corinth, Mississippi, the situation has, according to our correspondent, stabilized into a standoff, with both federal and state-aligned forces occupying positions approximately a mile apart across an agricultural area. And in northern Alabama, Redstone Arsenal has reportedly gone into full security lockdown, with federal personnel controlling the installation and state militia units reportedly gathering at its perimeter.
14 hours. I want to think about what 14 hours means for a civilian. 14 hours ago, most people were eating dinner, watching television, putting children to bed. In 14 hours, the following things have happened to ordinary people in the affected states. Hundreds of families have left their homes. Hospitals in Nashville and Birmingham have activated mass casualty protocols. Not because of casualties yet, but because they are preparing for what may come. School districts in at least 6 counties in Tennessee have announced closures. 2 major hospital systems in Alabama have asked non-essential staff to shelter in place rather than attempt to commute. And in one small town in northern Mississippi, a place called Yucca, not far from Corinth, the town's entire police department of 11 officers gathered at the mayor's home last night to decide, collectively, which orders to follow. 11 people in a small town sitting in a living room trying to figure out what America means right now. That is the human texture of this.
Official casualty figures have now been released by federal authorities, and I will read them carefully. As of the most recent Department of Defense briefing, the following has been confirmed. In the Route 79 engagement in Tennessee, 4 federal military personnel are confirmed dead, 9 wounded. Militia-side casualties, and this is where the difficulty begins, are estimated at somewhere between 8 and 15 dead, with an unknown number of wounded, because the militia forces controlled the aftermath of that engagement and removed their casualties. In the Corinth engagement, 1 federal marshal and 2 Mississippi State Patrol officers, both of whom had joined the militia-aligned side, are confirmed dead. No figures yet on the Augusta area incident, which remains unclear. That gives us a preliminary, very conservative confirmed death toll of 7, with realistic estimates suggesting the true number is significantly higher. These are the first deaths of this conflict. They will not be the last.
7 confirmed. And behind each of those 7 is a family who either knows already or will know soon. Behind each of those numbers is someone who 14 hours ago was alive and doing the ordinary things that people do. I think it's important to say their names can't be said here because we don't know them and we have an obligation not to speculate. But I think it's important to hold space for their reality. 7 people. And the number is going to grow. That is the thing that no one wants to say, but that every person who has ever covered a war knows. The number grows. It always grows. And at some point it stops being a number you can hold in your mind and it becomes something else, something statistical. And that transition, the transition from names to statistics, is one of the ways that war destroys something essential in the people who survive it.
We are now 20 hours into this crisis. The sun has risen over the American South, and what daylight reveals is sobering. Aerial footage, taken by federal surveillance aircraft and shared with our network, shows significant movement along major interstates in the region. Interstate 24 in Tennessee, Interstate 65 in Alabama, Interstate 20 in Mississippi and Georgia. All are experiencing what transportation officials are calling spontaneous mass displacement. Enormous convoys of civilian vehicles, moving both toward and away from the conflict zones depending on family ties and geography. The National Guard, in states that still have federally aligned guard units, has been activated to assist with traffic management, but the scale of movement is outpacing their capacity. The Red Cross has opened 42 emergency shelters across Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and the border areas of Kentucky, North Carolina, and Florida. As of this morning, those shelters held approximately 23,000 people. The number is expected to climb dramatically through the day.
I want to talk about the people in those shelters for a moment. 23,000 people who slept last night on cots in gymnasiums and church halls and community centers. People who left with what they could grab in 20 minutes or less. We have heard from several of them through our listener line. One woman from a town called Lewisburg, Tennessee, said she packed her medication, her dog, and her daughter's stuffed rabbit, and forgot her purse. She has $40 in cash and doesn't know when she's going home. A man from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, said he drove his elderly mother 5 hours north to his sister's house in Indiana, and then turned around and drove back because he couldn't leave his employees. He runs a small hardware store without making sure they were okay. He's back in Tuscaloosa now, and he says, "It's quiet here, almost normal, but it doesn't feel normal." That cognitive dissonance, the surface appearing intact while everything underneath shifts, is going to be one of the defining psychological experiences of this period.
We have now received the first congressional statement of this crisis, and it comes from the Speaker of the House. I will read it in full. The United States Congress is convening an emergency session to address the unprecedented armed conflict that has erupted in several southern states. Make no mistake, the United States government views these actions as seditious insurrection and will respond with the full legal and military authority available under the Constitution. We call upon the governors of the affected states to stand down immediately, to demobilize any state-sanctioned armed forces, and to enter into immediate dialogue with federal representatives. We remain committed to the unity of this nation and to the peaceful resolution of political differences through democratic processes. Violence is not speech. Secession is not liberation. The Union endures. That is the congressional statement. It is unambiguous. It uses the word insurrection. That is a legal and political designation with profound implications. It is also a word that escalates.
And the response from the secessionist coalition came within 2 hours of that congressional statement. The 4 governors issued a joint declaration, and I'll read the relevant portion. We do not recognize the authority of the federal Congress to define our lawful exercise of state sovereignty as insurrection. The people of our states have not risen in rebellion. They have risen in reclamation. We call upon our sister states to consider their own positions carefully. We call upon all Americans in every state to ask themselves, when a government no longer serves the governed, what is the obligation of a free people? End quote. That language, we call upon our sister states, is significant. It is an explicit recruitment effort. They are trying to expand the coalition, and we need to watch whether that succeeds.
It has now been 36 hours. We want to give you a consolidated picture of where things stand. The conflict zone has expanded. Overnight and into this morning, armed engagements have now been confirmed in 5 locations, up from the original 2. The 3 new areas are outside Huntsville, Alabama, where militia forces and federal forces clashed near the Redstone Arsenal perimeter, in the outskirts of Chattanooga, Tennessee, which sits at a critical highway junction and is now effectively cut off from through traffic, and in rural western Georgia, near the city of Rome, where a militia convoy was interdicted by federal forces. The confirmed death toll has risen to 31. 31 confirmed dead in 36 hours. Additionally, the economic impacts are now becoming visible in ways that will affect the entire country. The port of Mobile in Alabama, one of the largest commercial ports in the country, has suspended operations. The interruption of goods movement through that port will begin affecting supply chains within 72 hours.
31 people. And I want to pause on that because I think we are already, and I say this with genuine concern, I think we are already beginning to absorb these numbers with a kind of professional detachment that I want to resist. 31 people who went to work, or to a post, or who were driving a convoy, and who are not alive now. Their families are in the worst hours of their lives, and we are reading their approximate numbers between traffic reports and government statements, and I think we have to keep interrupting ourselves to remember what those numbers mean. 31. Say it slowly. 31.
Day 3 of the crisis. 72 hours in. The situation has evolved with a speed and a severity that has outpaced most modeling. Let me give you the infrastructure picture, because it is critical. Power grid. The southeastern United States shares a regional power grid managed by multiple utilities and coordinated federally. 3 substation facilities in Tennessee and Alabama have been damaged, one apparently deliberately, in what federal investigators are calling acts of infrastructure sabotage. This has caused rolling blackouts affecting approximately 400,000 homes and businesses across western Tennessee and northern Alabama. Communication. Cell networks are experiencing significant degradation across the conflict zone. Tower damage, generator fuel depletion, and deliberate jamming, federal sources allege the latter, have created what communications officials are calling gray zones, areas with effectively no wireless communication. Our affiliate in Memphis is operating on backup systems. Healthcare. Hospitals in Nashville, Birmingham, Memphis, and Atlanta are under enormous strain. Trauma centers are operating above capacity. Elective procedures have been suspended across the region.
We have received a remarkable piece of testimony that I want to share because I think it captures something essential about where we are. A nurse. She's asked us to call her by her first name only. She says, "Call me Rosa." Rosa works in the intensive care unit of a large hospital in Nashville. She called our listener line this morning during a break. She said, "We have military casualties and civilian casualties, and we have people who came in last night having heart attacks from the stress, and we're treating all of them. I had a militia member in one bay and a federal soldier in the next bay. They could hear each other. At one point, the militia member, who had lost a lot of blood and was not in good shape, started talking. He was talking about his farm, his kids. The federal soldier, he was younger, maybe 22. The federal soldier said quietly, 'I've got kids too.' And then they were both quiet. Rosa said she had to leave the room for a moment after that. That is what war looks like at the human level. That is the thing that gets lost in all the language about sovereignty and insurrection and liberty."
Day 4. The coalition of secessionist states has now grown. This is the most significant development since the initial outbreak of conflict. The governor of Louisiana issued a declaration of sovereign reassertion late last night, bringing the coalition to 5 states. And this morning, the governments of Arkansas and South Carolina each issued statements describing themselves as observers with sympathy to the coalition, falling short of full declarations, but a significant rhetorical shift. The Federation of States, either in open rebellion or orbiting it, now stretches from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River and beyond. Federal military planners are confronting a geographic and logistical reality that is genuinely unprecedented in the modern era. The question of whether the federal military, stretched across 2 coasts, a northern border, and international commitments, has the capacity to assert authority across that swath of territory, is one that our military affairs correspondents describe as deeply uncertain.
And the civilian population caught in the middle of that uncertainty is now enormous. The Red Cross has revised its shelter population estimate upward dramatically. As of this morning, more than 140,000 people are in emergency shelters across the region, with many more staying with family or friends or in makeshift arrangements that aren't being tracked. We are beginning to hear reports of supply issues, shelters in western Tennessee running low on food and clean water, shelters in northern Alabama reporting medication shortages. The National Guard units managing those shelters are themselves in an ambiguous position. In states with competing authority, Guard units have fragmented, with some personnel reporting to federal command and others to state command, sometimes within the same unit. The social fabric that makes organized emergency response possible is tearing.
Day 5. The death toll stands at 94 confirmed. 94. We also have, for the first time, civilian deaths in that count. 7 civilians are confirmed killed, 3 in Chattanooga in what appears to have been crossfire during an engagement near a civilian neighborhood, and 4 in a small town in Mississippi, whose name I'm going to withhold at the request of local officials who say the situation there is still active. The civilian deaths represent a threshold. Military strategists and historians will tell you that civilian casualties are where the moral and political calculus of any conflict shifts most dramatically. The federal government has issued a statement calling the civilian deaths in Chattanooga absolutely unacceptable and promising an investigation. The Tennessee state government has issued a counter-statement blaming federal forces for the deaths and calling them the predictable result of federal aggression on Tennessee soil. 2 stories, 2 versions of 94 deaths. This is what the information environment of a civil war looks like.
Day 5 also brought something that we should acknowledge because it's part of the full picture: acts of profound courage and decency. In Birmingham, Alabama, a group of local doctors, nurses, and medics, people from both sides of the political divide in that deeply divided city, established what they're calling a neutral medical corridor, A stretch of road and a community center declared open to casualties from any side, any affiliation. They hung white sheets from windows and flagpoles to mark their boundaries. Similar things are happening in other places. Ordinary citizens forming human chains to keep supply routes open. A gas station owner in Tennessee who has posted a sign saying, "Fuel for everyone, no questions." People hiding their neighbors. The worst and the best of human nature are happening simultaneously, and it's important not to let the magnitude of the worst cause us to miss the significance of the best.
1 week, 7 days. The confirmed death toll this morning stands at 212. The expansion of the conflict zone continues. Arkansas has issued a full declaration of sovereign reassertion, becoming the 6th secessionist state. South Carolina remains in the observer category, but has ordered its own National Guard to take defensive positions along the state's major infrastructure. The federal military has now fully activated, with elements of multiple Army divisions, Marine units, and Air National Guard squadrons repositioning to staging areas along the borders of secessionist states. We are told by military affairs correspondents that the operational plan involves establishing hard perimeters, sealing the secessionist states economically and militarily, rather than an immediate large-scale ground offensive. The reasoning, as one analyst explained it, is that an overwhelming ground invasion of 6 states would generate catastrophic casualties on both sides and harden civilian resistance. The perimeter strategy is slower, but its architects believe it is more likely to lead to a negotiated outcome. Whether that belief proves correct remains to be seen.
At the 1 week mark, I want to describe what daily life looks like inside the secessionist zone, because our correspondents who remain there are painting a picture that is both stranger and more ordinary than you might expect. In parts of Atlanta, life continues. Restaurants are open, traffic moves. But the state government has announced the formation of a provisional defense force and is calling for volunteers. Enlistment stations have opened in government buildings. There are reports of lines, significant lines. Not everyone who is volunteering is doing so out of ideological conviction. Some are doing it because they're being told there will be food and fuel for families of volunteers, which gives you a sense of the economic pressure building inside the zone. In other areas, rural Mississippi, parts of Tennessee, the picture is more fragmented. Local governance has essentially collapsed in some counties. Sheriffs are making their own decisions. Town councils are issuing their own edicts. The secessionist government is not a monolith. It is a coalition of competing authorities that is going to face enormous internal strain as time goes on.
10 days in, the economic impact of the crisis on the wider United States is now becoming acute and will require significant discussion. The stock market has experienced its worst 10-day period since the 2008 financial crisis. The Dow Jones Industrial Average has declined approximately 24% from its pre-crisis level. Bond markets are in significant turbulence. The Federal Reserve has made 2 emergency interest rate interventions in the last week. More concretely, for ordinary Americans outside the conflict zone, gasoline prices have risen approximately 35% nationally due to the disruption at Gulf Coast refineries and ports. The Port of Mobile remains closed, and the ports of New Orleans, inside Louisiana, a secessionist state, and Pascagoula, Mississippi, also secessionist, are now under militia control and closed to federal commerce. The goods flowing through those ports, which include enormous quantities of petroleum, petrochemicals, agricultural products, and manufactured goods, have effectively stopped. The economic siege is cutting both ways.
At the 10-day mark, the refugee situation has reached a scale that demands more attention than we've been able to give it. The United Nations, in an extraordinary development, has dispatched a humanitarian assessment team to the United States The first time in living memory that the UN has deployed such a team to American soil. The assessment team's preliminary public statement describes a humanitarian situation of serious concern, with significant populations displaced, essential services degraded, and vulnerable populations including the elderly, children, and those with chronic medical conditions facing acute risks. That is UN language. Carefully chosen, deliberately conservative, and still sobering. The estimated number of displaced persons is now somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 people. These are Americans, displaced inside their own country because their country is at war with itself.
2 weeks. The death toll has passed 500. 527 confirmed, with a realistic assessment suggesting the actual figure, accounting for unreported and militia-side casualties, is likely between 800 and 1,000. Major engagements have occurred in the past 48 hours around Chattanooga, which has become a focal point of conflict due to its strategic position at a river crossing and major highway junction, and in the coastal areas of Louisiana, where federal naval vessels have established a partial blockade of the port of New Orleans. We are also tracking a development in Huntsville that may prove to be among the most consequential of this conflict. The federal forces at Redstone Arsenal have, reportedly, engaged in a transfer of certain sensitive materials from the facility. Materials our correspondents describe as assets of significant national security concern. And this operation has required the clearing of a substantial buffer zone around the installation. The nature of those materials has not been officially disclosed.
2 weeks. And I'm going to read you something that I received this morning because it arrived at a moment when I needed to hear it, and I think our listeners might need to hear it too. It's a letter, an actual handwritten letter photographed and sent to our listener email from an elderly man in a small town in Georgia. He says he's 82 years old. He says he lived through the civil rights movement. He watched his town change and resist change and change again. He says, I've seen Americans hate each other before. I've seen them do terrible things to each other before, but I have also seen them get tired of it. Tired and ashamed and ready to be something better. I don't know if that's coming. I'm old and I don't know how long I'll live to see it. But I've seen it happen once, and I believe it can happen again. Please don't give up on the people. Even when they're terrible, don't give up on them. I'm going to hold on to that letter.
Day 17. The military situation has reached what analysts are calling a dynamic stalemate. The federal perimeter strategy has largely held. Secessionist forces have not been able to expand the territory under their control, and federal forces have not launched any major offensive to retake it. But the fighting continues at low to medium intensity across dozens of flashpoints along the perimeter. The cost of maintaining this stalemate is enormous for both sides. Federal military logistics are under strain. Secessionist states are experiencing severe shortages. Fuel rationing has been announced in Tennessee and Mississippi, and food supply issues are emerging in several areas. Communications within the secessionist zone have degraded significantly, and critically, the internal political cohesion of the secessionist coalition appears to be fracturing. Arkansas, which was the 6th state to join, and perhaps the least ideologically committed to the coalition's goals, is reportedly in back-channel contact with federal mediators. This has not been officially confirmed, but it is being reported by multiple credible sources.
The fracturing that Alex describes is visible on the ground in ways that go beyond politics. We're hearing from correspondents inside the secessionist zone that the promised unity, the promised liberation narrative is struggling to survive contact with reality. The electricity is out in some areas for 18 hours a day. Hospitals are rationing medications. Farmers can't ship their goods. Business owners are watching their savings disappear. People who joined the Provisional Defense Force enthusiastically 2 weeks ago are, in some cases, questioning what they signed up for. This is not universal. There are communities, especially in rural areas with deep historical ties to the secessionist cause, where resolve remains strong, but strong resolve and sufficient logistical capacity to sustain a military standoff indefinitely are different things.
3 weeks, 21 days. The death toll has crossed 1,000. 1,043 confirmed dead. This includes 219 civilians, deaths from combat crossfire, from medical care failure due to supply shortages, from accidents during mass displacement, and from what federal officials are calling deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure. The UN assessment team, which had been operating in border areas, has now issued a formal report characterizing the situation as a major humanitarian emergency and calling for immediate international mediation. 13 countries have offered to host peace negotiations. The federal government has said it will not negotiate with what it calls an illegal insurrection. The secessionist coalition has said it will not negotiate under what it calls federal duress. The two sides are not talking. 1,043 people dead, and the two sides are not talking.
21 days. I want to tell you about a town called Columbia, Tennessee. It's a small city, about 40,000 people, south of Nashville. In the first week of the conflict, Columbia found itself on the edge of a militia-controlled area. Federal forces held a checkpoint to the north. Militia forces held a checkpoint to the south. And the people of Columbia were in between. For 3 weeks, they have existed in that in-between. Businesses have stayed open as long as supplies lasted. The mayor, a woman who was elected on a platform of fixing the town's water infrastructure, has been negotiating with both sides simultaneously on humanitarian corridors. Food and medicine in. Civilians who want to leave, out. She has not declared an allegiance to either side. She has simply said publicly, "My only allegiance is to the 40,000 people in this city, and I will talk to whoever keeps them safe." She has been threatened by both sides. She has kept talking. Her city is still standing.
Day 24. We have a major development to report, and it represents the first significant diplomatic movement since the conflict began. Arkansas has withdrawn from the secessionist coalition. The governor announced the withdrawal this morning in a brief statement, saying, and I quote, "Arkansas entered this coalition in the belief that our sovereignty could be peacefully reasserted. 3 weeks of conflict and 1,000 dead Americans later, I cannot in good conscience continue on this path. We are not liberated. We are bleeding. Arkansas is returning to full federal authority, and we ask for the opportunity to begin healing." End quote. The secessionist coalition, which was 6 states, is now 5. Arkansas's withdrawal opens a significant corridor between the northern and southern portions of the coalition's territory. Federal military analysts are already assessing the strategic implications, but the political symbolism is equally important. The coalition can be broken. It is not monolithic. It can fracture.
The reaction to Arkansas's withdrawal within the remaining coalition has been swift and, this is something to watch very carefully, not uniformly negative. While officials in Mississippi and Georgia issued statements denouncing Arkansas as a traitor to the cause, we are hearing from sources inside Tennessee and Louisiana that there are private conversations happening at senior levels about the possibility of following Arkansas's lead. The math of this conflict is becoming undeniable even to its most committed participants. The coalition controls no international borders, no major deep water ports, no functioning air transport network. Its economic isolation is becoming more severe by the day. Its civilian population is suffering. The ideology that launched this conflict is colliding with the physics of logistics, and logistics, ultimately, wins.
Day 27. 3 days from the 1-month mark that our coverage committed to tracking. Let me give you the military situation as it stands. Following Arkansas's withdrawal, federal forces have been repositioned to take advantage of the new corridor in the center of the coalition territory. 3 major federal military columns are now in motion. One moving south through Arkansas into northern Louisiana, one moving through Kentucky into central Tennessee, and one moving along the Atlantic coast toward South Carolina, which has now fully joined the coalition in the past week. These movements are not unopposed. There is fighting. There are casualties being added to a toll that now stands at 1,611 confirmed dead. But the strategic initiative has clearly shifted to the federal side. The secessionist coalition is now fighting defensively across a larger front with diminishing resources. Military historians will note that this is almost exactly the geometric and logistical problem that brought the original Confederate cause to its knees in the 1860s. Some lessons are very slow to be learned.
1,611. I've been saying these numbers every few hours for 4 weeks now, and I want to try to hold on to what they mean. When this broadcast began, we were reporting on one engagement, 40 minutes old. We were saying multiple fatalities because we didn't yet have a number. Now we have a number, 1,611. And behind each of those numbers is the whole universe of a life, a childhood, a favorite song, a particular way of laughing, a face that someone loves. And when I try to hold all of that, the enormity of what 1,611 means, I can't do it. No one can. It becomes abstract. And maybe that's part of what makes wars possible. Our inability to truly hold the weight of the losses they generate. The only responsible thing I know how to do is to keep naming the number every time it changes and to keep insisting on its meaning.
Day 29. We are receiving reports that Mississippi has initiated a formal ceasefire request through a third-party mediator, specifically through the office of the governor of Texas, which never joined the coalition and has played a careful, neutral role throughout. The Mississippi governor's office has confirmed the outreach. The federal government has said it is reviewing the communication. This is the first formal diplomatic contact between any secessionist state, other than Arkansas, and federal authorities. It is fragile, uncertain, possibly reversible, but it is contact. In the world of conflict resolution, contact is almost always how it ends. Not with grand gestures, but with someone, somewhere, picking up a phone.
And in Alabama, we're hearing that Birmingham, Alabama's largest city and a place that has always been a complicated symbol of American racial and political history, Birmingham's mayor has announced that the city is declaring itself a sanctuary municipality and requesting direct federal liaison for humanitarian assistance, bypassing the state government. It's an extraordinary act of institutional defiance that mirrors what we've seen in Columbia, Tennessee, and in other places throughout this crisis. Local governments led by pragmatic, exhausted people who just need their hospitals to have medicine and their streets to have some measure of order, finding ways to stay connected to the broader federal system even when their state governments have broken that connection. The country is not just fighting. It is also, in its stubborn, complicated way, trying to hold together.
Day 30. 1 month. We committed to giving you a full picture at the 1 month mark, and we are going to honor that commitment. Let me give you what we now know with as much clarity as we can muster. The conflict is not over, but it is concluding. Here is the definitive accounting. Causes. This conflict grew from a decade of accelerating political polarization, amplified by economic inequality that fell disproportionately on certain regions, compounded by deliberate political strategy on multiple sides, that framed compromise as betrayal and confrontation as virtue. The immediate trigger was a series of federal legislative actions that secessionist state governments argued violated state sovereignty over land use, firearms regulation, and electoral administration. The declarations of sovereign reassertion were not spontaneous. They were planned, coordinated, and executed with military pre-positioning that took place over several months. The federal government's intelligence failure in not anticipating the coordinated nature of the action contributed to the severity of the early crisis.
Now the human cost. We have to give you this honestly and completely. The confirmed death toll at 1 month stands at 1,947. The realistic estimated total, including unconfirmed and unreported casualties, is assessed by federal medical and military officials at between 2,800 and 3,200. Civilians account for approximately 400 of the confirmed deaths. The displacement figures are staggering. An estimated 1.2 million Americans were displaced from their homes at the peak of the crisis, with approximately 600,000 still in emergency shelter or unable to return home as of today. The economic cost is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, with the southeastern economy expected to require years of recovery. The infrastructure damaged, power grid components, bridges, one major dam in Tennessee that sustained structural damage and required emergency management, will take years and many billions more to fully restore.
As to what remains of the country, the United States is, as of today, legally and constitutionally intact. No state has been recognized by any international party, including, notably, any of the 16 countries that offered sympathy statements early in the crisis, as a legitimate sovereign government. Arkansas has fully reintegrated. Mississippi's ceasefire request has resulted in a formal federal-state dialogue that our sources indicate is progressing. Louisiana, facing the pressure of federal naval blockade and the practical collapse of its port economy, is expected to enter negotiations within days. Tennessee and Alabama remain in active but significantly diminished armed conflict. Georgia and South Carolina, which joined latest and with the least military preparation, are in internal disarray, with their state legislatures fractured between hardliners and a growing bloc calling for negotiation. The coalition is dissolving. It will not dissolve without more deaths, but it is dissolving.
What remains of the world afterward? That question is harder than it sounds, and I want to answer it as honestly as I can. The world looks on the surface like it did before. The borders on maps are the same, the flag is the same, the government buildings are the same, but there is something different that is harder to map but just as real. Nearly 2,000 confirmed Americans killed each other over the course of 1 month. Many times that number were wounded. More than 1 million people left their homes. Children grew up in the span of these 30 days in ways that childhood should not have to accommodate. The families of the dead are carrying a weight that will never fully lift. And the questions that drove this conflict, about identity, sovereignty, equality, the meaning of unity, who this country is for, those questions were not answered by the fighting. They were deepened and made more urgent and made at the same time harder to discuss because now they come wrapped in the memory of the dead.
The cautious and honest note on which we end is this. The fighting appears to be entering its final phase. The secessionist coalition has failed in its strategic objective. It did not achieve international recognition. It did not achieve economic self-sufficiency. It did not fracture the federal military's capacity to operate. And it did not inspire the broader national uprising that some of its architects anticipated. The federal government has also failed in ways that will require honest examination. It failed to anticipate the coordinated nature of the secession attempt. It failed to prevent the first military engagements. And its communication with civilian populations in the affected areas in the early days of the crisis was, to put it charitably, inadequate. Both sides bear responsibility for the dead. Both sides will spend years refusing to admit the full weight of that.
But there are also things that held. The country did not fully fracture. Cities that declared themselves neutral, like Columbia, Tennessee, and Birmingham, Alabama, are still standing. The first responders and medical personnel who kept working across political lines are still working. The Red Cross workers and the shelter volunteers and the people who hung white sheets from their windows to declare their hospitals open to all sides. They held. The elderly man from Georgia who wrote to us about getting tired of hating each other, he held. The nurse named Rosa, who heard two soldiers on opposite sides of this conflict talking about their children, she held. And those things are not consolation for the dead. They are not substitute for the political and social work that must now begin. But they are evidence, real and documented evidence, that something worth salvaging is still there. That is where we are. That is what we know. I'm Sierra Lane.
And I'm Alex Mercer. You've been listening to Silent Waves Radio's continuous coverage of the outbreak of the Second American Civil War. A fictional account of a real human truth, that no country is immune to breaking, and no broken country is beyond the possibility of being put back together, however painfully, however slowly. We will remain on air. We will keep reporting, and we will keep insisting, in the face of every number and every loss, on the full, complicated, irreducible humanity of every person caught in the wreckage and every person trying to build something out of it. Stay safe. Take care of each other. This has been Silent Waves Radio.
And to the woman in Nashville who asked us not to stop broadcasting, who was listening on a battery radio with her neighbor in the dark, we didn't stop. We're still here. We hope you are too.